If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It's my pleasure to have John Adams back on the show. John, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Tim. It's good to be with you tonight.
Well, thanks for coming back on the show. Of course, you are the co-host of the Afternoon Commute, a periodic show you do with Chris Kendall, who you also participate in his Hoax Busters Call show. So, here we are, recording here on the first day of 2018. And last month, you did but a couple of weeks ago, you did a show. I think it was a special report, that old time, end time religion, where you talk about the link between, well, mass culture and mega churches, and even mega consumerism, mega box stores. The Dominionism in evangelical Christianity has been politicized. This organization, Council for National Policy, in its relation to perhaps the intelligence agencies and U.S. foreign policy and Council for Foreign Relations, and sort of this manipulation or fomenting of religious or ideological extremism by the intelligence agencies. So, how do you want to sink your teeth into this one?
Well, yes, so much to start with. Yeah. I think with what Chris and I were doing on that particular call. And you can go check that out, hoaxbusterscall.com. And like you said, the episode is called That Old Time, End Time Religion. There's been people who have analyzed the Council for National Policy and obviously mega churches and that whole type of culture. I was kind of looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I don't think it's touched on too much, which is what Chris and I try to do, is look at certain things that are commonly looked at, but kind of from a different perspective. And the angle I was particularly interested in, just coming from an objective standpoint, I don't dislike Christians or just want to qualify myself here. I'm not a religious person, but I'm looking at it objectively. So if you're an evangelical Christian, don't take it as I'm trying to critique you personally. But evangelical Christianity from basically, arguably from its inception and basically from the post-World War II time period, and really once you get into the 1960s is a very strange thing. And one of the things that it was primed for was the end of the world. And you see this kind of apocalyptic culture come up through Christianity. And, you know, there's always kind of been that to a certain extent. People thought when the Great Depression was happening that the end of the world was happening. People thought the end of the world was happening in World War I or World War II. But this was a little bit different in it because you had you kind of had mass culture and mass media, which is something that you and I have talked about multiple times, to, you know, operating at the fullest extent by this point. And you also had these very interesting things all kind of coming to a head with protest. You know, the whole kind of protest culture has come up in the 1960s. And obviously dialectics are being created during this Cold War period. I think I'm hearing a little feedback.
Oh, you are? How about now?
Yeah, do you hear that? No, I'm not hearing it now.
Okay.
So the Cold War period you get into, and so you have this threat of the Cold War. You know, the evil Russians are under the bed, and the nukes are coming any day now. Also, around about the end of the 60s, as you get into the 70s, you have, the serial killer phenomenon magically starts to pop up, and Manson murders, and, all sorts of other apocalyptic type stuff, right? And around a little bit earlier, 1951, you have this thing that's called the Campus Crusades for Christ, which was started by Bill Bright and his wife, Vanetta Bright. And they started this at UCLA. And this is what kind of interested me, is because, once again, you have the phenomenon known as Southern California, which Chris and I have done extensive research into the history of Southern California as it plays out as a kind of culture creation device for the rest of the country and later the world. So one of their prime movers and shakers for this Campus Crusades for Christ that operates still today under the name of CRU, C-R-U, was a man by the name of Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey became very famous because he wrote a book, and that book was titled The Late Great Planet Earth. And The Late Great Planet Earth was a book full of predictions that Mr. Lindsey still makes these predictions today. You can go on YouTube and find daily updates from Mr. Lindsey about nowadays he talks about the New World Order. So, but he's been making these apocalyptic predictions for a very long time. Actually made a career out of it. And there's a very good article, I brought this up on the call, and it was interesting that this article was written just around the same time as I was kind of putting the final touches on the stuff for that call. And it's from Humanities Magazine. It's winter of 2017. And the article is titled "The Late Great Planet Earth Made the Apocalypse a Popular Concern." And so anyways, it just, goes on and gives you the basic history of the book and whatnot. And one of the things I thought it was pretty funny that they pointed out is that Lindsey was going around preaching the end of the world, yet he drove, sports cars and had office built, had a plush office in Santa Monica and had long-term real estate investments, stock portfolios and things like this. So, if the end of the world was coming, he certainly wasn't going out of his way to get rid of all of his earthly possessions. And
long-term investments, yeah.
yeah, long-term investments, those type of things. But anyways, I won't go through this article. I'll just kind of touch on some types of things along this line. So what you had starting back with just kind of American Christianity, across the board, for the most part, you have, the worship itself. The worship service was pretty similar in nature. No matter what type of church you went into, and I would say, well, you're Catholic, Tim, but do you go to a traditional Catholic church?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it's a Novus Order church, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's you go to most mass any church in the area, and occasionally I go to another one, and it's pretty much the same. Yeah, it's okay.
So
the liturgy, it's all very they follow a strict form. Yeah.
Okay, so to a certain extent, even Catholicism followed a similar pattern. One of the things I was getting into is that, like, say here where I live, this whole area is covered with churches here in Southern California, and they're all of different denominations now. But maybe at one time there would be a Methodist church within 3 blocks of each other. And that was because churches and neighborhoods went together. And you didn't have to, and they followed a kind of formal, with similar services and whatnot, because you didn't have to go, travel, a mile away to go to this other pastor, because they all kind of did the same thing.
Yeah, and with Catholics, of course, you had parishes, and they still have parishes. It's organized along those lines. You parish to the diocese. Of course, perhaps 40, 50 years ago, it was more ethnic based. You had the ethnic neighborhoods with the church parish. It was more cohesive than today with suburbia. But so it's suffered a similar thing with the breakup of the urban neighborhoods, ethnic urban neighborhoods, in the diaspora and the suburbia. So, and you do have people that do go parish. They'll go to another parish because it's more conservative or orthodox. Paris hopping,
right.
Yeah.
And you didn't like I was saying, at one time you didn't really have to do this.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, since I've lived out here where I currently live, like I said, I'll attend a church on occasion. Unfortunately, for the most part, I'm disappointed, just to kind of observe and or attend something for our family or something. But I did, yeah. So there's a Catholic church, but I have to literally drive 12 miles away to get a Catholic church where they have more of a traditional kind of service.
Yeah.
I did go to this one right up the street here one time, and it was like going to an evangelical church. So it was a charismatic Catholic church, which was interesting because I'd never even been into one of those before. And I wasn't even really expecting it, because the exterior was very deceptive, because it looked like a normal, regular Catholic church. And then I went in there, and it was literally like going to an evangelical church. And I was pretty surprised. And so like I was saying, at one time, this wasn't a problem. This wasn't an issue. The worship services were across the board, whether you were Lutheran, Methodist, whatever. The worship services were all the same. The reason I'm making such a big point about this is because by the time you get into the late 1950s, 60s, a whole lot of things had kind of coalesced and I don't think it's by accident, into this idea of new kinds of worship. And one of the things that was pushed, interestingly enough, by a lady named Henrietta Mears, who just happened to be the mentor of Bill Bright, who was the creator of the Campus Crusades for Christ, who employed Hal Lindsey. She was the lady who pushed the idea of Sunday school. Okay, and she was a mover and shaker. She was hanging out with Ronald Reagan and, Billy Graham. She's a big promoter of Billy Graham. And in fact, probably one of the biggest people to push Billy Graham. She was able to push it through her, Sunday school mechanism to promote Billy Graham's crusades and those type of things. So the idea of Sunday school is an interesting concept as well. And one of these things is that breaks up the worship service is this idea that the family is split apart from the regular worship service. This was kind of a new idea. And so the children go off to their, Sunday school, and later, once you get into the 1960s, is the idea of youth groups, which is also interesting considering how much the church and everybody was so against communism. Yet you would think, man, this is a very communist idea. We're going to break the children off into youth groups, right?
Yeah.
And so, like I was saying, I was raised in a Christian household. My parents were what you would call Jesus people. They came up at the original. They went to church in the 70s and in the early part of the 80s at the original Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, where it was all Reformed hippies and that type of stuff. Another part of the worship service that changed very much that I brought up on the call was, just like my parents were baptized at the beach. Calvary Chapel was known. They're in the Jesus People movie with Pastor Chuck Smith baptizing people at the beach. This is a very unheard of thing at the time. This is a very radical departure from the original stuff.
Mm-hmm.
To go get baptized at the beach and all that. Now, as this radical departure from worship and this kind of old, and I'm just I'm just using this term to make the description of the people, what these younger generation of people, these baby boomers who are coming up were thinking at the time, is that you have these old church going, pew dwelling fuddy-duddies. That's this whole idea you're kind of sold, right? Is that's that old, that's that old crusty old church over there with all those old people in it, and they smell, and we don't want to go there.
So this is sort of this focus on youth that was popular. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have this youth movement that's coming up within Christianity. The youth movement corresponds with the ideas of the same things that was going on in popular culture of youth and rebellion and revolution. Interestingly enough, Bill Bright's book is called Revolution Now. Okay, so he wrote a book. It was all about the Campus Crusades for Christ, and it was talking about a revolution in Christianity, focusing on young people. Hal Lindsey went to the Campus Crusades. It was pushing this idea. Part of this new idea of Christianity was that the end was near, and you better get right with God. I remember my parents, on one of their first cars, they had a bumper sticker, and it said, "Get right or get left." Okay, that's the way. If you don't, and if you you don't understand what I mean. It's you get right with God or you get left behind.
This is the rapture.
Because, the rapture was coming. The rapture was coming. The apocalypse was coming. The end was near. There was a Cold War. So on and so forth. But see, the end was never meant to come. Obviously, the end was not near. The end didn't come. But as you move through the 1970s, and I'm just kind of wrapping this up in a pretty little bow here, is as you move into the 1970s, you have a kind of transformation of Christianity on a whole, one out of the local churches into the mega churches, because out of this Jesus movement, out of this Campus Crusades for Christ, you get the mega church movement. So the localities are broken up, and everybody's moved into the mega church. Now you don't go down the street to go to the local crusty old people sitting in the pews. No, you want to go to the big mega church where they jump up and down and have the flashing lights and the rock band and everything else, which helps break up the community as well. I mean, perfect example. My parents used to live in Westminster, California, and they used to drive all the way over to Costa Mesa, which, I mean, it's not that far of a drive, comparatively speaking, for California, but I'm sure there was a church. I mean, we're in Churchville here. As liberal as people think California is, at one time it was not totally that way. There's literally a church on every corner in California of some denomination. Okay, so if it's not a Methodist, it's a Lutheran. If it's not a Lutheran, it's a Mormon church, or it's a Buddhist temple. We've got everything here. So that was another thing that this happened, is like the mega church comes in, breaks up the old way of doing things. Now you're going to go, there's new types of churches on top of this. You go worship in something that used to be like a metal shop or a wood shop, and they've converted it into a church, like in an industrial park. Yeah,
they call it like a worship center or something.
Yes. Yeah. My parents used to, after they stopped going to Calvary Chapel, they went to a place like this. I remember that church rented out a school. They rented out a school auditorium to have church in. Sometimes you'd go to church at people's houses or something like that. And whatever, I'm not saying that's bad or anything. I mean, that's the way it was. That's how I was raised. But I'm just saying that was a break from the past. You have to ask yourself, why do those things come in? At what point is there a trend setting? There's all sorts of these new ideas that, okay, that old way of doing things is out. This new way of doing things is in. We don't need to go to churches. We don't need steeples. We don't need, that whole thing. Well, why? And what was the purpose of it? And what came out of it? Well, it's interesting that by the time the 1980s comes up, you have this creation of Christian conservatism. You have this blending of the two together. And you didn't necessarily across the board have that prior to the mid-1970s. It's not that conservatives weren't Christians, but it's also not that conservatism was exclusively Christian like it pretty much is today. So it's an interesting thing that you see, and the savior, the Messiah, was Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Ronald Reagan was the vehicle used to create this Christian conservatism, and people literally thought Ronald Reagan was a Christian. They literally believed him to be, their man in the White House. They took back, the Christians took back power from Satan, Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Jimmy Carter always claimed to be a Christian. I don't know if he really is or not, but he always said he was, but apparently he wasn't good enough because he was a Democrat. And I'm not getting into politics here. I don't care either way because whether it's Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, or Obama, it doesn't make any difference to me. But you see the dialectic at work here. It's like, okay, they were bringing Christianity fully into conservatism. It was politically fueled. It was moving those things parallel to each other and then merging them. And it succeeded. You created a base from the radical youth of the 1960s, the ones who, went astray after the hippie dream didn't come about. They went to all different types of things. A lot of people went into New Age and cults and whatever. And then the new Christianity was also one of these things that came out of there. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that there was a guidance from government, and they had their hand in this as well. It's also interesting that a lot of this stuff comes out of Southern California, considering the stuff we've talked about in the past about Southern California. This is back in the 1950s and 60s, this is the hub of aerospace and military-industrial complex. It's a very, very conservative, anti-communist region at that time period. And it just so happens that a lot of the major mega church / televangelist type stuff is centered right here in Southern California. Would you go figure that, Tim?
Yeah.
What an interesting. Let's just go over a couple of them. So, like I said, Calvary Chapel is in Costa Mesa, literally just a mile up the way from it, across the freeway, is TBN. The studios, the whole bit, the Paul and Jan Crouch and Hal Lindsey and whoever else, Kirk Cameron, whatever. They're all there. Just a couple miles up the freeway, you've got Saddleback Church. Rick Warren, Council on Foreign Relations member, probably one of the biggest mega churches in the world. I don't think he's the pastor there anymore, but he is famous for, like I said, being a Council on Foreign Relations member and also hosting the debate between John McCain and Barack Obama at the church, in the church. Coming back up the freeway and going a little north, you'll run into the city of Orange, which is home to the Crystal Cathedral.
Schuler's,
of course,
right? Robert
Schuller.
Yeah.
Of course, Robert Schuller is interesting because there's a lot of things interesting about him. No doubt he is, some sort of Freemason. Obviously not anymore, but he was.
And that used to be a drive-in theater or something?
At one time it was. That's what, you have a lot of these newfangled worship type stuff. Talk about that. He bought a drive-in movie theater and had a church where you would literally drive in and sit in your car to go to the worship service. Like a movie, like a drive-in movie theater. And then on top of that land, he built the Crystal Cathedral. Interestingly enough, I pointed this out in the past, but just once again, taking this away from the traditional ideas, he employed Richard Neutra to build his first church, which Richard Neutra is a famous modernist architect. And then to build the Crystal Cathedral, he employed the next generation of modernist architects, Philip Johnson. Okay, and if you ever saw the Crystal Cathedral, it literally was an upside-down pyramid made out of crystal glass. Okay, so it's nothing about tradition. It's nothing about, you know, denomination, I guess you would call. I don't even know what you would have called Crystal Cathedral. It was like a non-denominational something or other. My dad was a pastor at one time, and he never liked Robert Schuller or anything. He's like, I don't know what that guy does, you know. I don't know what Bible. He used to say, I don't know what Bible he's preaching out of. That's what.
Yeah. I remember listening to some of his talks, and I was my impression was always get to the point.
Yeah, I think a lot of it. Another phenomenon, especially popular here in Southern California, it was a lot of prosperity gospel as well. So.
Yeah, Joel Osteen type stuff.
Yeah, Joel Osteen is the new megachurch prosperity gospel guy. I don't even think Joel Osteen. I wonder if he's ever even opened a Bible before, because he doesn't use one on his podium. I know that he doesn't even have a Bible around. And Rick Warren was the same way. Rick Warren used to have like a copy of his book up there on the podium that he would read out of. So it was, you know, the purpose-driven life was the new Bible. Yeah. So like I said, there's this mega change into mega churches. There's this apocalyptic religion to kind of get people hyped up and psyched up, and they better switch over to Christianity. And it's interesting too. Bill Bright had a quote in his book Revolution Now. I don't have my copy handy. It's packed away at the moment, but in there he talks about how not only non-believers were in danger of being left behind in the rapture, but also other Christians were, because they needed to accept the Holy Spirit as well as being just the regular old Christian that they were before. You see, it wasn't just good enough. So, actually, Tim, can you give me a quick second while I go put my daughter to bed?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Let me go do that real quick. I'll be right back. Okay. So, yeah, you have this mega church culture, you have this change, it's all building up into Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan succeeds at, you know, being the figurehead to merge the Christian and conservatism. And around the same time, you have this organization formed called the Council for National Policy, which was something that was actually started by Tim LaHaye, who, you know, was famous for his, a lot later, the Left Behind series, which came about, in the 1990s, I think. And once again, you have this fascination with all of these same guys, with the end of the world, the apocalypse, right? So they reinvented this whole end of the world scenario for the next generation of people. And like I said, one of the main things that popularized this idea was that book, The Late Great Planet Earth. And me and Chris were kind of looking over this book and laughing at it, because I have an original copy of it in its first incarnation before it was updated subsequently to, you know, modernize itself for the age to make sure it
it stays relevant, I guess.
it stayed relevant. So the 1988 version is talking about how, you know, the end of the world is coming, and the 1989 version talks about how the end of the world is coming. Kind of like how, well, I won't name any names, but, you know, there's authors within the conspiracy culture who do the same thing.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they rewrite the same book over and over and over again. It's just updated. And the end is always near, and FEMA camps are always around the corner. Yeah, we were looking over this original copy of The Late Great Planet Earth, and it's pretty funny because Lindsay actually goes into Scripture, and he takes some leniencies with Scripture in particular. Like I said, I'm not a Bible scholar. I don't claim to know any about that stuff. I've read the Bible, and I get the whole idea. I read it a couple times. And I'm pretty sure that when Ezekiel is talking about, fighting armies and things like that, he wasn't talking about the Red Russian Army. Only Hal Lindsey makes this claim in his book that that's what he's actually talking about, and that when they were fighting, they were going to be using nuclear weapons against each other. So that's one of his claims. You can literally, I'm not making this up, you can literally go into the book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and he says in there that the book of Ezekiel is referring to America fighting the Russians and using nuclear weapons on each other. Okay. So this type of, this acquires the name dispensationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this kind of dispensationalist idea that runs really through, we didn't really get into this on the talk. Chris and I didn't really get into the 80s. I will get into the 80s again in another talk, but dispensationalism becomes evident in, a lot of people who become associated with government, and there's kind of this this weird idea. It's a very strange one that that in order to bring it's almost like you recruit people in a weird way to be to think that if you can bring about the apocalypse, that will bring back Jesus.
Well, that's the whole thing behind the Schofield Bible, right?
Yeah. So it's that if you were to get into a particular position of power within government, you do everything in your power to cause war and wreak havoc. I'm not saying that people have ever done this, but I've actually seen people say this. Like, we need, they were talking about this when Bush and the Iraq War. We need this war in order for Jesus to come back.
Yeah, that's Christian Zionism, I guess.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, that plays into this as well, because Hal Lindsey openly calls himself a Christian Zionist. He and so all of these things, interestingly enough, Jay Dyer actually hit me to something that F. William Engdahl had kind of wrote about the Crusades being used by the Pentagon. And some interviews that he did talking about this particular subject, also pertaining to wars in the Middle East, this kind of idea of the modern day crusade. Yeah,
wasn't that General Boykin or something in the Pentagon who around 2001, 2002 got into some controversy because he had said some things regarding, the jihadists and Muslim extremists, these things.
Yeah. So, one thing I also want to point out is that at the same time you have this radical form of Christianity, this new evangelical dispensationalism coming up during the 1960s and 70s, what other radical extremist religion is being born at the same time from basically the same intelligence agencies?
Well, I guess in the 70s you have this the creation of Islamic fundamentalism.
Right.
Yeah.
I would even say as far back as the 60s personally, because I think what happened was they introduced those texts And then by the time the 70s comes around, you start to see the manifestation of this and this alleged idea that there, are killer Muslims everywhere.
Yeah, there was I think USA Aid had a contract with the University of Nebraska Omaha, and within the 70s they'd spent like $51 million producing books, literature, and pictures to sort of radicalize military things and sort of disturb things. The madrasas themselves were funded through the ISI in Pakistan, these things.
Yeah, and the main focus was the reinterpretation of the idea of jihad. Mm-hmm. It was not a personal jihad. It was an external jihad. It was war that needed to be waged, and so this was the new thing to teach. And one thing that's funny,
applied domestically, you mentioned some of this phenomenon of Ronald Reagan and the moral majority, and this coming of age or the coalescence of a political consciousness of evangelical conservatism, basically getting behind the Republican Party. And this same thing also occurred in the Catholic community because of the culture war in the 1970s. By the mid-70s, the Democratic Party became increasingly liberal on cultural issues, abortion, emerging gay rights, and it was Nixon who dismissed McGovern as the party of amnesty, acid, and abortion. And Reagan played on that too. Reagan, sort of played the pro-life Trump card in 1980, and this caused them to rally around Reagan. And so these issues, whether it was feminism at the time, the cultural issue, abortion, and you had Life magazine, pushing things like teenage pregnancy, and you had I think it was SECUS, the Sexual Education and Information Council, pushing sex education in schools and these things. From this, you get a harsh political reaction, which culminated in the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. And so, again, the political landscape, the cultural landscape, is being created for these things to create the political backlash, or at least to make people rally around or coalesce behind certain politicians and these things. So,
yes, and like I was saying, you have these. Well, let me just read this. The Council for National Policy described was an umbrella still is. The Council for National Policy is an umbrella organization and networking group for social conservative activists in the United States. It has been described by the New York Times as a little-known club of a few hundred of the most powerful conservatives in the country who meet 3 times yearly behind closed doors at undisclosed locations for confidential conference. It was founded by Tim LaHaye in 1981 as a forum for conservative Christians seeking to strengthen the political right in the United States. It describes itself as a foundation organized under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. We do not lobby Congress, support candidates, or issue public policy statements on controversial issues. It was modeled on the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay.
Yes.
You're supposed to be like a right-wing analog or a counterweight to the CFR, right?
Yeah, it says the CMP. It says the CMP was amongst its founding members were Tim LaHaye, then head of the Moral Majority, Nelson Bunker Hunt, T. Cullen Davis, William Seiss, and Paul Weyrich. Members of the CMP have included John Singlaub.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. J. Peter Grace. Edwin Follner, the founder of the Heritage Foundation. Mm-hmm. Pat Robertson. Mm-hmm. Jerry Falwell. Trent Lott. Paul Pressler. Michael Perutka. Paige Patterson, Don Nichols, John Ashcroft, Larry Pratt, Colonel Oliver North, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Eric Prince.
Okay, yeah, that's funny.
Betsy DeVos.
That's Amway and Blackwater and all that, yeah.
Yeah, so...
and that's interesting. You Singlob and North.
I forgot to mention Edwin Meese.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was part of the Reagan's troika that came in from California. Yeah, Attorney General, of course. Yeah.
So a lot of these people are dubious characters just because they are right wingers or call themselves Christians. I wouldn't necessarily judge their actions as being as such, personally.
Yeah, I was reading an article by the Collins brothers, Peter and Paul Collins, about the Counselor for National Policy. He describes these characters as Hegelian activists.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because they're kind of they're using dialectics and I would say that the most famous CNP members was, of course, Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah, and she came on the scene with that book, A Voice, Not an Echo. A Choice, Not an Echo, yeah.
Choice, Not an Echo, yes.
And that was the Goldwater era.
It was the Goldwater era, yes, it was. So, Goldwater is another interesting component to this. There's so many things. If I had the time to just sit and kind of look at all this stuff, maybe one day I will be able to get around to it. But particularly the Southern California aspect of it is very interesting to me. It all, like I said, there's a lot of things coalescing around that time period. Military-industrial complex area, mega churches, super anti-communist, ultra-conservative area, and this new form of Christianity is literally born out of the churches in that particular area. Now, here's something I discovered. I thought you might think this is interesting as well. And can you hear me okay, Tim?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. Let's see if my inbox allows me to open this here. Have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Paul Cain?
Paul Cain with a K?
No, with a C-A-I-N.
No.
Okay. Paul Cain is a Pentecostal Christian minister involved with both neo-charismatic churches and the charismatic movement. Cain currently resides in California and ministers monthly at a local church in Santa Maria, California. Paul Cain was born June 16, 1929 in Garland, Texas. It says Cain drew crowds of 30,000 in Switzerland and Germany with his meetings. So it says here he started... It says here he started out... This is an interesting story here in the beginning. It says that his mother, Anna, had been diagnosed with cancer, tuberculosis, and other difficulties and was not expected to live. Her case was so severe that she was the subject of special medical attention. To the astonishment of doctors, both Cain and his mother survived the birth. His mother was subsequently healed. Cain attributes this to an angelic visitation his mother had at the time and to the fervent prayers of his family. It was during this time that he was given the name Paul, and his mother became sure of his calling to preach. So I guess he was this is not very complete here, this description. It says he drew crowds of 30,000 in Switzerland and Germany with his meetings. Cain's ministry at this time used a very large tent, like most other ministers, such as Billy Graham, Oral Roberts, and Jack Coe. Kane, however, eventually became disgusted with what he saw as the corruption of a once pure movement into a circus of hype and greed. In the late 50s, he claimed that he was challenged by the Lord concerning such excesses of various leaders in the movement and suddenly disappeared from public view. He later began to travel around the world proclaiming the gospel and calling the church back to purity and holiness. He served as a consultant to the Central Intelligence Agency Paranormal Division. That's me making cricket sounds there. Let me read that again.
Paranormal Division, huh?
He served as a consultant to the Central Intelligence Agency's Paranormal Division. He was also a consultant to the FBI and was a presidential consultant and special envoy for 3 presidents. He ministered to many national and international leaders. During the Clinton administration, Kane went to Iraq to meet with Saddam Hussein. How come we've never heard of this guy? He also met with spiritual leaders, including key church and denominational leaders. Okay. In April 2004, Rick Joyner, Jack Deere, and Mike Bickle, 3 ministers who long held a close ministerial relationship with Kane, met with Kane to confront him about a homosexual relationship and several drunken incidents of public drunkenness. He denied these accusations, which led Joyner, Deere, and Bickle to release a statement in October stating that he was unwilling to participate in the restoration process. However, in 2005, Kane stepped down from the ministry and issued a letter of confession. Well, he said, quote, "I have struggled in 2 particular areas, homosexuality and alcoholism, for an extended period of time."
So now you have human compromise, because that this string of like deviance or homosexuality is like all throughout like the CNP suspicions that the Council on National Policy and.
Yeah. Well, Trent Lott always strikes. Wasn't he involved in something like that?
I'm not familiar anything with Trent Lott. There was that other senator, with the in the bathroom with his shoes. What was his name again?
Oh yeah,
Colorado, I think.
Oh, I'm thinking of what was that dude? Ted Koh.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it was like a minister in Colorado or something, right?
Oh, you had Haggerty, right? Ted Haggerty?
Ted Haggerty, not.
Yeah, Ted Haggerty was apparently methamphetamine prostitute.
That's another weird one, though. There is another weird group, Ted Koh. Isn't that, there's that weird group in D.C., The Family?
Are you talking about you talking about the Finders?
No, The Family. You never heard of The Family?
The Family. Okay, the Family.
Yeah. You know what? You should get that dude on who wrote that book, The Family, Jeff Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
You should try to talk to that guy because nobody ever interviews. I've only heard a couple interviews with that guy. And what's interesting about this book, The Family, is I've been into several libraries where this book has been discarded.
Oh, really?
Like, I find it in the discard. I actually have like 2 copies of it over in my boxes. But yeah, because this guy wrote this book. What was it, like 2007 or something? It was called The Family, and it was about this political organization that was somewhat Christian in nature. Yeah, this was something I would have to look more into myself, but
because you had the same thing with the CNP, and also ties to the whole Franklin scandal, and also Iran Contra.
Yeah, absolutely. Those things all play into this as well, because like I was saying, Ollie North is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Council for National Policy. Mm-hmm. Freudian slip there.
So you hear this guy Paul Kane. He seems to be some sort of like intelligence operative.
Yes. Now, interestingly enough, okay, you know how I heard of Paul Kane?
No.
All right. I heard of Paul Kane. I'll just go ahead and read this to you here. Charles Ward Smith was an American pastor who founded the Calvary Chapel, beginning with the 25-person Costa Mesa congregation in 1965. Smith's influence now extends to more than 1,000 churches nationwide and hundreds more overseas, some of which are amongst the largest churches in the United States. He's been called one of the most influential figures in modern American Christianity. Charles Ward Smith was born June 25th, 1927 in Ventura, California, to Charles and Maud Smith. He was the second of three children. After graduating Santa Ana High School in 1945, he graduated from Life Bible College and was ordained as a pastor for the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel. In the late 1950s, Smith was the campaign manager and worship director for Paul Kane.
No. Okay.
After being a pastor for a different denomination, he left his denomination to pastor a non-denominational church plant in Corona, California, and eventually moved to a small pre-existing church called Calvary Chapel. Okay, now this is very interesting. So here we have so if you've ever seen the Jesus People movies, part of it focuses on the cult known as the church, the Children of God. Everybody's familiar with that, I'm sure. And then the other part of it focuses on the Jesus movement, which shows footage of people going down to the beach. And I don't think Jesus people were bad. Like I was saying before, I don't think evangelicals are bad. Probably most people who have Calvary chapels, even the pastors themselves, I don't think they're bad people. Okay. I just think this movement doesn't show up on the cover of Time magazine and get a movie put out about it and everything else. Pardon me. And excuse me. And all this stuff kind of, rolling with it at the same time. And you and I have discussed this before, Tim. Yeah. Obviously, these movements, they just, naturally through grassroots phenomenon just gather, momentum, right? Isn't that how it works?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just
it just catches on. It's just like me and you talking on the phone here, and then all of a sudden, hey, Tim, you heard about this really cool thing down here? And you're like, oh, cool, I'm going to go start one of those in my area. And then that's how it works.
Yeah, it's the free market of ideas. And
yeah. Okay. And then the next thing just through me and you talking about it on a phone call, it's on the cover of Time magazine and they're making movies about it, right?
Yeah, and people are famous because they're just so exceptional and rich. They're just exceptional.
Yes. Yeah. So like I was saying, one of the churches that they're showing is Calvary Chapel. The people are going down, they're getting baptized. Literally, the Christian rock music movement was born out of this church. And this pastor, who is world renowned, he's known, there's Calvary chapels all over the world. He's very famous. Met with presidents and all sorts of things. This guy worked for a Central Intelligence Agency agent, operative.
Think there's some connection there between his success and his connection to the intelligence agencies?
I would think at this particular time, Bill Bright has connections to government. Ronald Reagan, he's buddies with Ronald Reagan. Like I said, Henrietta Mears was. Hal Lindsey. I would speculate that Hal Lindsey is some sort of agent of some sort. I mean, I at least know he's an agent of the Council for National Policy. I don't know for a fact that Chuck Smith was a Council for National Policy member, because, like I said, he was out here on the West Coast most of the time. He's a pretty easily accessible guy, too, from what I can hear, from what I've heard. So he wasn't very high profile in the sense that you couldn't go down to the church and talk to him, but it's a very big, massive organization. And like I said, I even know Calvary Chapel ministers in other states and things like this where they're not really necessarily connected to the church. Like, they don't pay dues or anything, just kind of have to preach that particular brand of whatever it is they preach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So mainly it's kind of through extending the name and extending that idea, but its beginnings are very strange. Now, like I said, I'm here making the point, and you have another interesting thing here.
Well, it's an interesting analogy here to another operation. This is for Islamic fundamentalist operation, is the Fethullah Gulen network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this multi-billion,
the Turkish thing.
Yeah, and he's just this old guy, but he's obviously connected to intelligence agencies, and they've created this multi-billion-dollar network of madrasas to promote Islamic fundamentalism. And what is he like in PA somewhere? Is it? I forget what city in Pennsylvania, but he runs this network of these madrasas, and it's just his wealth and his operations. There's no real explanation for his existence other than the fact it's been created for him, courtesy the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got these weird schools that are popping up all over the place and all that. Yeah, interesting. So in March of 1960, Smith brought into his home then 18-year-old Pentecostal evangelist Lonnie Frisbee. With his wife Connie, Chuck Smith paired him up with John Higgins, who had already had a Bible study going for youth groups. They started a Christian commune called the House of Miracles. John and Lonnie went out into the community to reach its youth with the gospel during the early days of the Jesus movement. The church in Santa Ana grew, and as of 2006 was attended by 35,000 people and had spawned over 1,000 churches that have branched out as a part of the Calvary Chapel Association. Smith has been called one of the most influential Christian pastors in Southern California. Former ministers who have been mentored by Smith include Skip Heitzig, Mike McIntosh, and the world-famous Greg Laurie, famous for his Harvest Crusades. At its beginning, Calvary Chapel operated as a cross-cultural missions organization that bridged the generation gap as it existed during the Vietnam War period. Calvary Chapel was a hub of the Jesus People phenomenon that existed at that time and was featured in Time magazine for its success among hippies and young people. It pioneered a less formal and contemporary approach in its worship and public meetings. For example, it did outreaches on the beach and baptisms in the Pacific Ocean. Much of contemporary Christian music has its roots in Calvary Chapel. Calvary Chapel's rolling commentary style of preaching kept the Calvary Chapels close to the text of the Bible and was readily understandable by many hearers. It developed its own internal training for multiplication of church leaders and pastors by pioneering a more informal and contemporary style in its practices. It reached large numbers in Costa Mesa and expanded easily by adding many pastors and new congregations in many locations, which that's exactly what my dad did, because my dad had his own Calvary Chapel at one point. So like I said, it only lasted a few years, his particular branch, but thinking about it, we were only a couple miles away from the mothership when he had his church. So it was just that the mothership was so big and there were so many people there, it was really hard to get in.
So at the very time that this church is expanding and they're setting up franchises all around, its founders have direct links to intelligence agencies.
Yes, yes. Now, I'm going to get to something else here real quick. In his 1970, now, once again, coming back to Hal Lindsey, Late Great Planet Earth, The Apocalyptic Vision, Chuck Smith wrote a book in 1978. It was called End Times.
Okay.
Smith predicted the generation of 1948 would be the last generation and that the world would end by 1981. It's interesting because 1981 was the year the Council for National Policy started and Reagan became president.
Yeah. So they're promoting sort of what they're picking up on this Cold War situation.
Yeah.
The nuclear standoff and these things. And, of course, I think you and Chris, and we've talked about not just the existence of nuclear weapons and the question of their existence, but some of just the psychological effect of their existence or their perceived existence and what that does. And of course, this end time stuff is obviously they're telegraphing or they're piggybacking on this sort of the Cold War fear.
Yes,
duck and cover these things. So it's not too far removed from say it was Edward Bernays' duck and cover campaigns and these things.
They love nukes.
Yeah.
They're all into nukes. It's just nukes all over the books, the Left Behind stuff, the Late Great Planet Earth. It's just nukes, 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 nukes. You know who else likes nukes is Chuck Missler, which interestingly enough, there's another pastor. They're all named Chuck and they all have no, I'm kidding. But yeah, another guy, he actually, don't you think it's weird? This guy's name's Chuck Missler and he literally helped to create missiles. Isn't that strange?
Yeah. Chuck Missile.
Yeah. Chuck Missler, and he worked on missiles for the government, for the Pentagon. He also helped create computer systems, one of the first guys to help. I'd have to go back and look at his profile here. I could do that in a minute, but.
And this would also serve sort of the business model of Southern California, which is big into aerospace and military.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you have the religion that goes along with the Cold War, with the anti-communist fear, with the occupations of the area. It's all right there. It's all crafted, And this is a very hybridized religion, by the way, too. It's kind of, it's another thing too. Is with Methodists or Lutherans or even Catholics in the past, you had structured kind of stuff. Once you get into the postmodern period, youth groups and having your worship service in an industrial park or whatever,
yes.
It's a very postmodern approach to it. So the actual beliefs in the religion itself can take whatever form you want it to.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So it's very malleable at this point, and you can spin it off into nukes and just nukes, 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 nukes. And so, yeah. Go ahead.
And because it's the will of God, individuals aren't responsible. You're not responsible for working for a defense contractor that's making weapons of mass destruction or weapon systems or promoting the Cold War and militarism and these things, because it's just this is prophecy.
Well, there's other things that are tied into this. They have some deeper roots. I touched on this on one of the past recent Hoax Busters Call. having to do with education and the corporate state and the influence of the corporate state on education, and the influence on the kind of the redefinition of individualism. And but moving it further down the line, you have this kind of interesting approach here. So capitalism equals Christianity, communism equals Satanism.
Yeah.
You see? So Russia was Satan, America was Jesus. That's how it was positioned. I'm not saying that, like I've said before, I'm not a nationalistic person. I'm not a patriotic person. If people like their country or want to be that way, fine, whatever. I don't hate you. I don't dislike you. But the idea of pairing patriotism and nationalism with Christianity is not something that is natural to, one, the religion, and two, there's Christians in Russia. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to go nuke all the Orthodox Christians over there? So you see, it's to pair nationalism and patriotism with your religion is not it's not logical. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
and it's something totally developed out of American culture, or lack of it. So, and it's totally, in my opinion, it's developed by intelligence agencies at this point. And another thing that I wanted to read this for you. This was pretty funny here. Is that is in 1981, Smith said it was his deep conviction, but he could be wrong, that the world was going to end in 1981, and he held a New Year's Eve service in 1981 for the followers to wait for the end of the world to occur. And when the world failed to end, many disillusioned followers left the Calvary Chapel movement. Smith attracted criticisms for drawing connections between disasters such as the 9/11 attacks and homosexuality and abortion.
Yeah, Jerry Falwell did the same thing.
Yes.
I remember that, yeah.
Which I wouldn't be surprised if that was some sort of talking points given to pastors, is that God was punishing America for homosexuality and abortion with fake footage of fake planes flying into buildings, obviously. See how that works? That's how God works, apparently.
Well, at least that explains the anomalies, because it's a miracle.
Yeah, with fake Muslim terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
With literal actors like Osama bin Laden. If you believe the official narrative of Osama bin Laden, you have a guy who comes from a fully westernized family whose family engages in Western commercial ventures, fully westernized.
Yeah, I think they're like part of the Carlyle group or something.
Right, exactly. Same,
partners with the Bushes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's even a rumor I heard. I've never been able to totally confirm this, but I wouldn't be surprised considering all of the ironies that are involved with the whole 9/11 thing, is that they contracted bin Laden Construction to help build the World Trade Center. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
That wouldn't surprise me.
But considering there's considering there's a minaret on top of the Freedom Tower now.
Well, didn't like a bin Laden family rebuild Khobar Towers or something in Saudi Arabia, and so it's like
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard me and Chris talk about this, but the original idea for the original architectural idea for the Twin Towers is constructed to look like Mecca. Were you aware of that?
No, but that obviously proves that the country's being taken over by Muslims. So so we better fight them over there. So
yeah, all the way back in '72 when they were planning the building out or whatever. No, I'll send you that article where the guys talking about that. Anyways, yeah, it kind of got digressed there, but yeah, we got punished on 9/11 for all the bad stuff, which obviously that type of stuff when it comes to religion is bad. If you believe in your religion and you believe those things to be bad, does that necessarily make faked terror events with fake terrorists a punishment? You see, it's ridiculous to kind of, but it makes sense if you're a pastor receiving talking points. And you don't necessarily have to be in on the whole thing. I would say you could just be some guy who gets, who's part of the CMP or whatever, and you get your talking points and you say, hey, we've got to make our stance politically here. Christians have to be represented in the political game, and here's what we do. And you and I, you listen to me, Pastor Tim. If we're going to make a difference here, you're going to have to say this at your service. And,
yeah, and you'll get money for it too.
Absolutely would. Interestingly enough, Lonnie Frisbee, which if you've ever seen a picture of Lonnie Frisbee, he was in my opinion. I'm always qualifying that by saying that, but of course it's my opinion. Lonnie Frisbee looks like Jesus. And I think they literally got him to look like that. He's this very charismatic young guy with the long hair and the beard and the whole bit, and he at this particular time in the 1960s, he was very effective in recruiting people to come to Calvary Chapel. Interestingly enough, just like Mr. Paul Kane, he had a problem with homosexuality, drug use, and alcohol.
I mean, that's just a running theme in these circles.
Yeah, and if you go watch this movie, there's a movie about it, about Lonnie Frisbee's life. Everybody at the church knew about it, but kept it quiet because he was such a charismatic pastor, and he was so good. And they've even got an interview with this guy. It was hilarious. It's so funny because he's like, Lonnie would come in, and I could tell that he'd been partying the night before. He's all, but the Spirit of God was just running through him. I could just tell. So yeah.
I mean that's like in with the Franklin scandal and Craig Spence and these things, his call boy operation that apparently he had access to the White House. The Washington Times read about it in late June 1989. Then the story was suppressed. That's interesting because the Washington Times itself is kind of linked into this through the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, who has all types of connections back to a lot of these groups like Richard Viguerie, South Korean intelligence, and these things, and this activism. And the reason why these names are so big and is because they're in the game. They're involved in armed shipments, drug dealing, and these things, money laundering, and these things, one way or another. And so they're all involved in in this sort of this sort of enterprise, I guess you could say, of stirring up trouble, part of the cultural war, divide and conquer. I think you and Chris talked about someone like a Larry Pratt, member of the CNP, who was also involved in gun running in Nicaragua in the 80s.
Yes.
And and was it Alex Jones says he promoted gun rights in Nicaragua or something. That's why he was doing it.
Yeah, that's what they were. Yeah, that was an interesting interview.
Yeah.
That one time I heard that where he was interviewing him and he was saying how the gun running they were doing was because they wanted to arm the people against the Sandinistas. And the way that they were positioning it wasn't really from the position of like, oh, we were, they were making it seem as if they were getting guns over there to the average person.
Yeah.
To fight, for whatever it was they were allegedly fighting for over there.
Yeah, that's what Fast and Furious was. They're just pointing gun rights in Mexico.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So that's how they made it sound with the, and if you go back and read a lot of that stuff from that time period, having to do with John Singlaub and Somoza, they're all buddies with, like I said, Singlaub was a CMP member, and of course he was buddies with Somoza and those particular the switch from the Sandinista. Am I right in thinking is that the Sandinistas there?
Yeah, Nicaragua. Yeah, they overthrew Somoza in 70.
Okay,
yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, from what I gather, it's the CIA overthrowing one person to bring in their other funded organization, like
Cuba.
Yeah, like Cuba. So I don't believe that was a real overthrow of the government. Just like Hosni Mubarak or something. Yeah,
it's another hot spot or something. It's the same thing. They go in. You have a character like Singlaub and Richard Armitage and Oliver North. They all came from this operation in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, where they were involved in in the opium heroin trade coming out of Laos, Cambodia.
Right.
And it was at Vang Pao, the general there, that he supplied children soldiers in return for heroin, and then
you're talking about the stuff that's in that book, Politics of Heroin.
Yeah, and it's the question of, did the CIA form these alliances, convenient alliances, to fund the operation, or was the operation itself a pretext for the drug trade? Because the drug trade, I think, actually goes further back. The importance of the drug trade, like the opium, particularly in the 19th century, and the families that went on to form Skull and Bones and these things, like the Russell Trust. This would create the financial empires, which would ultimately create the intelligence agencies. So, and you don't. These programs sort of take a life of their own, because all these guys that are doing this is what they do, and this is Richard. What is Singlaub or Colonel North or General Secord supposed to do if he isn't involved in gun running and shipping in drugs and creating turmoil in some benighted third world country? That's what they do. Mm-hmm. it's their enterprise, exactly. As they say. It's their enterprise. And they make a lot of money doing it. If you're an agent, if you're like a Secord or North, or even like E. Howard Hunt, you're kind of beyond good and evil, and you just don't live by the same rules. At least you don't think you do. Hunt eventually found himself in prison, but they're not as big important as they think they are. They can be fall guys too, but it's a whole sort of mindset or milieu, if you will. This sort of utter criminality, and it's funny how some of these churches. These mega churches would be roped into, because again they're there creating sort of I guess you could say the ideological justification for these things in people's minds.
Yeah. There was something I was reading from that covert action bulletin.
Yeah, that's like is that LaRouche?
It might be.
Yeah, I might get that wrong. No, he's executive intelligence review. So
yeah. Covert action. I think it's some lefty type thing from the 80s. And I was reading from it on that last call that I did with Chris, and they were saying that there was Campus Crusade people in Nicaragua, and one of the guys who is the head of the Campus Crusades for Christ in Nicaragua got detained by the Sandinistas because he was, caught with large sums of undeclared money, and what? Right, and they were saying they were claiming that the Campus Crusades were a CIA front. Interestingly enough, this guy, I can't remember his name offhand, but he was, after this happened, he used this as the thing for him to go around and tour the churches in the Campus Crusades to tell his story of how bad it is in Nicaragua and how we need to go and intervene in that, right? And this is gun run.
This is the time when Ronald Reagan is comparing the Contras to the the founding fathers and the Continental Army, these things,
freedom fighters.
Yeah. Same thing. The Mujahideen, famous for meeting with these, these
Z-Big
and Hector McCara, this heroin dealer, and these things, and also how these actually, it wasn't as if the drug trade existed to the extent that it did prior to the intelligence operation. The effective intelligence operation causes the drug trade to explode, which then floods the country in the United States and Europe with this stuff, which creates a whole other problem, which someone is well paid to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this stuff has to do with these big scandals. These are major players within those particular scandals, and there's this crossover between, once again, politics, religion, manipulating churchgoers and people's minds into believing, Ronald Reagan is a Christian, and funding Contras in Iran is Christian, and Contras in Nicaragua are Christian, and the whole bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ollie North had to sell the cocaine from Bill Clinton's garage because it was God's will. He was doing God's work.
Well, think about what a nonsense this makes of what, how the electoral political scene is sold to the American people about Republicans versus Democrats, when the story of Oliver North is Mena, Arkansas, and that's the Bushes in business with Clinton to fly in the cocaine and to ship out arms from the armory there, and that's Colin Powell's operation. He's actually okaying that. And Colin Powell, of course, years later would be the one who sits there and with Iraq with the fake, with the prop of the anthrax prop, with George Tenet behind him to give it sort of authority, because with the CIA, director of CIA behind him, it's got to be true.
Yeah, the one thing I brought up before, which I think the Iran-Contra thing was a bit of theater all in and of itself. I think a lot of these scandals are pure theater. And, maybe you disagree with me to a certain extent on that, but answer me this quick question, Tim, and I'm just asking this facetiously. Why would you even need to let the public know about that at all? Like, why would you have to, let's say you find out about the Ollie North running coke or whatever, same thing, with banker bailouts, same thing with, any one of these scandals. I don't care what it is. I don't care what the scandal is. Monica Lewinsky.
Mm-hmm.
That alleged scandal, that, in my opinion, is totally fraudulent and fake altogether. How do you have a movie come out about this exact same thing before the scandal actually takes place in real life? Makes absolutely zero sense. But yeah, why would you even need the public to know about it? And two, why would you need to broadcast it on TV for umpteenth months on end if it weren't for the purpose of kind of a demoralizing and a I guess a soap opera for the American people in politics? But I think a lot of this, when it gets to these scandals, it's a very demoralizing thing for people.
Yeah, it's social, it's alchemy.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you're right. You're right. I mean, at one level, it's actually happening, but people are being manipulated. They're either witting or unwitting, playing a part. I mean, I think the cocaine's coming in, the money's being made, and South Central LA is being destroyed for eventual, gentrification. There's a business model there, and they're promoting. But as far as the exposure, I don't think you have sort of an intrepid independent press that got a story. And some reporters, I think, might have been genuine about doing it. Like Gary Webb can be fed a story, then he's taken care of in these things. And but why would it get out? Yeah, just like the banker bailout, when they can do this stuff all in secret. Why have this, $700 billion thing, and then why even talk about it? Why the controversy? Because you wouldn't
need to. You wouldn't need to, unless it's serving a larger kind of psychological purpose on the public,
mm-hmm.
which is most definitely intentional. And even if it's not intentional, it's still having the same effect. But
that's like the Vietnam. Earlier we talked about the Vietnam War as alchemy. Social alchemy is the the war itself and the press coverage. People think the press coverage was a press that was critical of the war and undermined the war effort, and there was just simply too much freedom, or there was freedom, so the information got out, and you had technology at the time, so you had satellites, and you have news feed and color television. People could watch the war and all its carnage, and this undermined the war effort. But in the final analysis, all that was all part of the program, because the war itself was necessary to create the anti-war movement and the reaction to the anti-war movement. And all this is being manipulated because at the same time, you have the music scene and the drug culture being created. And it's all coalescing.
I've said this multiple times. Chris says it too, is the purpose of... you can look at all different little facets of what the purpose of Vietnam was. Was it for the drugs? Was it for the power? Was it for, whatever it was, in the military industrial complex? The main purpose of the Vietnam War was to change American culture. It wasn't really so much a war on Vietnam. Obviously it was bad. We went over there and, blew people up, and people got killed, whether they were soldiers or Vietnamese people.
Mm-hmm.
But the main target of that war was American culture. It was to change the culture. It was to pit the youth against the old people. It completely changed all sorts of different micro facets of American culture. All sorts of things. You and I even talked about this, one time, about how if you really wanted to destroy Vietnam, all they had to do was industrialize it.
Mm-hmm.
And that did more to destroy it than the war did. Or like I said, a listener pointed out to me one time that he had read that Iran Corporation thing, which I've never been able to find, but he said he read something on the Iran Corporation saying that they purposely put motorcycles in villages to destroy villages so that boys would leave the village and go to the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how Vietnam gets incorporated into the sort of this one world trade system or New World Order, if you will, or something. Which it is now, by the way. So when all that theater of the embassy in Saigon in 1975 and the helicopters taking off and I'm not saying there wasn't this horrible exodus and the refugee problem and the starvation, but that's all part of the theater.
It really was, because the main if you think about it, like you're saying, like one of the things from that war that was necessary to help shift the culture was having people watch it on TV. Mm-hmm. And having all of those horrible things come on the television in the background while you're eating your Hungry Man TV dinner.
TV dinner.
Yeah.
And you're sipping your Tang that they took to the moon with them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, you got all the good stuff, and yeah. So you have by the time you and I were, you were a teenager and I was a young boy, having the news and footage of carnage and war on in the background was just like no big deal by the time the 80s came around.
Yeah.
Right?
And of course the first Gulf War was like, you had the Scud Stud, Arthur Kent, if you remember that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
He's good. He's cute. He's good looking. He's reporting on missiles. Of course, we all know there's a good chance that was probably a soundstage somewhere.
Sure. Oh yeah.
With CNN get caught doing, or some leaked, whatever. That's all.
And then think about the modern day environment of news, which I didn't even pay any attention to whatsoever. But even when I did, 10 years ago or something like that, it was fascinating to me, the advent of the info porn star babe.
Yeah, the Fox News and or the CNN news girls and all this stuff. These beautiful women reading you the news.
Yeah, just telling you the most horrible things, but they've got what's the one lady from Fox News? I can't even remember. Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Oh yeah, the big lips.
Yeah, the big, and she's got her, she's always wearing the short skirts with the legs and all that type of stuff, while they're discussing, alleged serious politics or all this type of stuff. It's a very interesting part of the brain being, two things being merged right there. Yeah, so this type of new media and one kind of background media, it's the backdrop to your dinner. It's you get up into the 1980s and you have all of this type of stuff. But let me digress for one quick second. I was talking about the family. Here's a little thing I'll read. The Family is a 2008 book by American journalist Jeff Sharlet. The book investigates the political power of the family, or known as the Fellowship, a secretive fundamentalist Christian association led by Doug Coe. I thought it was Ted Coe. It's Doug Coe. Sharlet has stated that the organization...
I've heard of Doug Coe before. Is that Choe?
Yeah, COE.
Yeah.
It says that Sharlet has stated that the organization fetishizes power by comparing Jesus to Vladimir Lenin, Ho Chi Minh, and Osama bin Laden.
So it's like Dominionism on steroids.
Yeah. So he does this to give examples of leaders who changed the world through strength of the covenants they had forged with their brothers. Let's see. It says 1 year after the book's initial publication, the sex scandals of prominent members of the family, such as John Ensign and Mark Sanford, as well as the accusations that the family was illegally subsidizing the rent of members of Congress and involved in the proposed bill which would impose the death penalty for homosexuality in Uganda, thrust the notoriously secret organization into the national spotlight. It says that...
but they were promoting a law in Nigeria. Was it Nigeria, did you say?
Uganda.
Uganda for the criminal for death penalty for homosexuality.
Yeah.
Well, I remember that controversy when the leader there talked about that. Yeah, and again, yeah, that's one of these fake. It's just a stirred up controversy. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. Washington D.C. Let's see. What does it say here?
I think it was Museveni or something. His name in Uganda or talked about that.
Yeah. That's. I don't even think. I don't even think that's real. Is it?
No. And then they.
Yeah.
Then they pushed the AIDS thing too, with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta love that. Let's see here. Charlotte criticizes their theology as an elite fundamentalism that fetishizes political power and wealth, consistently opposes labor movements in the U.S. and abroad, and teaches that laissez-faire economic policy is God's will. He criticized their theology of instant forgiveness for powerful men as providing a convenient excuse for elites who commit misdeeds or crimes, allowing them to avoid accepting responsibility or accountability for their actions. Said Charlotte's book was endorsed by several commentators, including Frankie Schaeffer, once a leading figure of the Christian right, who called the book a must-read. Let's see. Doug Coe has been described as preaching a leadership model and a personal commitment to Jesus Christ comparable to Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Hitler, and the above mentioned. He once demanded from the followers in a videotaped lecture series in '89, he said, "Hitler, Goebbels, and Himmler were three men. Think of the immense power these three men had, but they bound themselves together in an agreement 2 years before they moved into Poland. These three men had systematically a plan drawn out to annihilate the entire Polish population and destroy by numbers every single house." Coe adds that it worked. Right?
It worked?
Yeah, that's what he says. Though he calls the Nazis these enemies of ours, he compares their commitment to Jesus's demands. Jesus said, "You have to put me before any other people, and you have to put me before yourself." Hitler put me before yourself. Hitler demanded that of the Nazi Party, and you have to put the Nazi Party and its objectives ahead of your own life and ahead of other people.
And he sees that as a model for...
Yeah. Coe also compared Jesus' teaching to the Red Guard during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Said, "I've seen pictures of the Red Guard in China, and they would bring the young man's mother and father, lay her on the table with a basket on the end, and they would take an axe and cut her head off. They have to put the purposes of the Red Guard ahead of their mother, brother, and sister, their own life. That was a covenant, a pledge. That's what Jesus said."
Okay, that's... Okay.
So it sounds like, this is like, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like...
hardly the Sermon on the Mount.
It's like neoconservative... It's like neoconservative evangelicism or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Leo Strauss mixed with Christianity.
Yeah, because Leo Strauss, the neoconservatives are Jewish, but then Leo Strauss's mentor was this guy, Carl Schmitt, Nazi legal theorist.
Yeah,
And
it
just they're all just thrown in there. It's just like, yeah, didn't you realize? Yeah, well, the Zionists need the Nazis. The Nazis need the Zionists. You know, it's like, you know, It's like,
yeah. Well, the other thing too is the kind of the Leo Strauss type stuff. It gets into the will to power and the Machiavelli, the Machiavelli type stuff. The
noble,
that's what this
noble lie and all that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Noble lie.
It's interesting, Frankie Schaeffer, because Frankie Schaeffer is the son of Francis Schaeffer, and that just jogged my memory about Francis Schaeffer. I always forget to bring him up, but he's a major player in the beginning of politically merging. Do you know who Francis Schaeffer is, Tim?
No, refresh my memory.
He was like a Presbyterian who had a commune in Switzerland. It was called Le Havre.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And he was, what do you call it? He was like, pardon me. I don't want anybody out there to think I'm an expert in religion at all, because I'm not. But what do you call it when it's like a presuppositional apologetics? Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Don't ask me to say that again, because I can't. No, but in any case, what it is like he didn't like modernism, right? And so I guess he started a commune in he started a commune in Switzerland, and it was this Christian commune. But he here, let me bring up his Wikipedia here.
Where is he from originally?
He's from America.
So how was he able to go to Switzerland? I mean, they're pretty restrictive with their.
Yeah, okay.
He must have had a lot of money or backing or something for that.
Well, it says he was born in Germantown, Pennsylvania. Let's see. Oh, this could get kind of deep. Looks like he had missionary parents who were involved with China Inland Mission. That sounds kind of...
That's probably like Rockefeller or something.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. There.
OSS or something.
That's what I was just thinking. Anytime you hear about missionaries with churches in China, it's like you're going to be like hanging out with Julia Child or something there.
Yeah, you think about Yale Divinity School, the theological seminary, and these things, and. But I'm just wondering how you said he set us as a commune in Switzerland. It's like he must have had some backing to go in there and just. You can't just walk in there and establish a commune as an American citizen. You're gonna have to either buy your citizenship or have some backing or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Basically, what he said. The one thing that always sticks out in my mind is he wrote a book called A Christian Manifesto. I read that many years ago, but he basically gets into the idea that and this was a book from the 70s, leading up into the 1980s. And Francis Schaeffer is also considered kind of the founding father of Christian politics. Mm-hmm. In the modern world, and he's famous for a quote where he said something along the lines of, Christians need to get politically active in America. Mm-hmm. So he wrote this book called A Christian Manifesto, and it lays out the basic notion that the founding fathers were Christians and they established America as a Christian nation. And that modern day Christendom, i.e. 1970s, early 80s Christian, needed to get politically active, i.e. that translates into you need to vote for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, so you're back to that, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is all part of that 70s thing because
here it is. Here, I just actually found it on the Wikipedia here. It says Francis Schaeffer is credited with helping spark a return to political activism amongst Protestant evangelicals and fundamentalists in the late 70s and early 80s, especially in relation to the issue of abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which that's always the one that, I personally don't believe in abortion. I would never say that was a good thing ever. I don't believe in killing other humans, especially little tiny babies and that type of stuff. But I know for a fact that abortion is always used as that anchor issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a wedge issue, or it's not designed to be resolved in any way.
It's an anchor. It's an anchor issue to get you to vote Republican.
Yeah, that's what made most Catholics, or at least conservative or practicing Catholics, Republican in the 1970s.
Yes.
Prior to that, most Catholics were actually were Democrats.
That's true. That's
working class, lower middle class, working class, Irish Catholic Democrats, Northeast, these things. And that was the fundamental shift in the late 1970s when abortion became a political issue. And that was, of course, a function of the Supreme Court's decision in 1973 to tear it away from the states and make it a national issue.
Yeah.
That's what Roe v. Wade did. It was, because some states were more restrictive than others, and they made it a national right,
Absolutely. Yeah. It says here
and prior to that, it wasn't really a presidential issue. You see how important that is in roping in, sort of corralling and directing, millions of voters.
Well, it's also interesting that coalescing around the same time is you have this rising Christian movement right around 1968,
mm-hmm.
right when the abortion issue. These things are all working together. You see what I'm?
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that before. It's like abortion comes up, becomes federalized. And then you've got this Christian movement that eventually is going to oppose that, and they're going to literally have a dialectical headbutting up until the present day, never getting anywhere with it. And it's literally born around the same time period. Another interesting issue to think about that I brought up on the call with Chris is that Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan are both from California.
Mm-hmm.
They both play vital parts in the beginnings of this, two things, really. You have this kind of, as much as I don't think I believe the president is just, playing a role. He doesn't really have much power per se. Just this kind of idea of that there is power vested in the president. Like, because, that's the whole thing that revolved around Nixon, was like, the president has too much power. He's taking over. There's too much power concentrated in the, executive branch and that type of stuff, right?
Yeah, this is the imperial presidency. We heard about this. I remember that in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this kind of thing kind of playing itself out, and anytime you get a Republican in, you can always hearken back to Richard Nixon, even though I don't believe like I said myself, I don't believe they don't do much. They take orders, they read scripts that are pre-written for them, and they have Zbigniew Brzezinski. Well, they had he's no longer with us here.
They have a Kissinger. They have these consigliaries. Kissinger. It was Rockefeller. They were working for Rockefeller, not for Nixon.
Yeah, of course. So these guys don't do anything, but then the press and rights groups are all, there's too much power and all this type of stuff. So anytime you get a Republican in there, you have this idea. The lefties like to say, look, Reagan's too powerful, or George Bush, he's able to go to war by just, wave of the hand or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly enough, that in and of itself is actually a good thing for Republicans, because when they want to go to war or they want to do stuff to fight for Christianity and God, you need a person who takes the reins and takes the power back. So on one side, it's a bad thing from the left wing or the libertarians, or the alt media might call, unless it's Trump, they don't call him out on anything. But if it's on one side you call somebody out for he's unconstitutional or whatever, but at a certain level, Republicans and conservative Christians are okay with you being unconstitutional if it means that you're going to go, blow up radical Muslims or, kill commies.
Yeah. Or engage in illegal wiretapping,
Yeah, that type of stuff.
It's okay if you're a Republican, if you're,
And so, like I said, Richard Nixon was, grew up in Whittier, where I used to live, and was from around Southern California, Yorba Linda, San Clemente,
mm-hmm.
and he ended up living in San Clemente. So he was from this whole area around here where you had, once again, the churches and the military-industrial complex and the whole bit. Same thing with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was governor of California around the same time period.
Yet Nixon was put into power by the Eastern establishment, the Bushes, Prescott Bush,
mm-hmm.
who were cashing in on this burgeoning military-industrial complex in California. That the Bushes are always part of that. That goes back to like Samuel Bush and the Remington Arms and all this stuff, and the War Industry Board and all that. So they're always there to cash in on the crisis that they've created.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me just finish this quote here from Francis Schaeffer. He said that, like he said, especially, he was really radical about the issue of abortion. Schaeffer called for a challenge to what he saw as the increasing influence of secular humanism. Schaeffer's views were expressed in two works, his book entitled Christian Manifesto and his film series called Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And basically, what he says here, what does he say? He says, a true Christian in Hitler's Germany and in the occupied countries should have defied the false and counterfeit state and hidden his Jewish neighbors from the German SS troops. The government had abrogated its authority and had no rights to make any demands. Then he suggests that similar tactics be used to stop abortion. But he argues that he's not talking about theocracy. He said, let me say that with great emphasis, Witherspoon, Jefferson, and the American founders had no idea of theocracy. That's made plain in the First Amendment, and we must continually emphasize that the fact that we are not talking about some kind or any kind of theocracy. He just basically says that they were all Christians, but that they had this idea of not merging church and state together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it was up to the modern day Christian to take back the political power, because that's what the founding fathers had intended. You see,
this is why they put up all those Freemasonic DC.
It's just pretty. So it says Christian conservative leaders such as Tim LaHaye have credited Francis Schaeffer for influencing their theological arguments, urging political participation by evangelicals. So on and so forth. It says, in A Christian Manifesto, Schaeffer's argument is simple. The United States began as a nation rooted in biblical principles, but as a society became more pluralistic, With each new wave of immigrants, proponents of a new philosophy of secular humanism gradually came to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because in the 20th century, up until the 20th century, probably up until after the Second World War, which really destroyed the United States as it was originally designed, there was sort of a modus vivendi with the United States. There's the kind of balance between the local and the national. One of the things was obviously you had a situation where the states could veto the federal government, and that, of course, the Civil War destroyed that. No, perhaps another Freemasonic project, but also, but even after that, you had this United States was, particularly in the East, its heavy populated area was sort of this confederation of ethnic enclaves. And this was was an example where this goes back to these ethnic neighborhoods and these churches where you would have sort of a healthy influence of religion on politics because it was indirect, it wasn't explicit. And this post-war variety, this Dominionism, it's developing in sort of this deracinated communities of suburbia where there's no real ethnic ethno-religious identity. It's all surrounded around these huge mega churches, right? And there's no real community, so there's no real resistance to the empire. Whereas prior to that, there was real resistance to the empire. There was localism, and local government, however corrupt, it's a lot better than big government, centralized government that's corrupt. Because at least local government, with wards and with local bosses, have to have some loyalty to the area, and they have to measure their corruption, or at least they're inhibited in some respect because this is their area. Whereas when you dealing with sort of a cosmopolitan global empire with an elite that has no loyalty to any given area, something like the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers, you get what you have today with the New World Order. And
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's kind of understanding what America was, because there's some healthy resistance to all this stuff prior, up until the middle of the 20th century. And World War II really was a watershed, because that's when America really became the empire, which was a function of those wars. If you really go back to it, I mean, you have Rene Wormser in his book about the foundations, and we're in the early part of the 20th century, was decided that that war would be the best way to fundamentally transform society, and they did it. They created all these crises and wars.
Yeah, that's the Reese Commission.
Yeah, and with that, you might be getting a real glimpse into what the agenda was. You might,
I think a good portion of it, especially. Well, there's a book I was reading from recently, like I brought it up earlier. It's literally the only book I have left on my shelf currently. It's by Joel Spring. It's called Education and the Rise of the Corporate State. Mm-hmm. And it goes over, like I was saying, it goes over this kind of reinterpretation, or creating a new idea of what individualism means. Mm-hmm. And so even so much as to the fact that in America is kind of founded on this idea of the rugged individual, and whereas that even in of itself could be some sort of, like, at the time, kind of marketing to kind of get people to go west, or to, fight in the various wars of the early, 19th century, or whatever. Mm-hmm. The idea of it was from its inception, I'm sure to a certain extent, that people, when they were living here and growing up here, that they just naturally had that to a certain extent. It wasn't all the product of just, marketing. Mm-hmm. But they also had genuine communities, and those genuine communities, you know, it's kind of a weird thing. It's like you're individualistic, but at the same time, your individualism is also genuinely tied to your family and tied to your neighbors. And how that works is it's kind of like myself. I'm sure you're the same way, Tim. It's like I like to do good things, or at least try to do good things, try to say nice things. I don't always succeed at that, but you try to do good things because you know it's good, and you know that there's also a possibility that it could benefit you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's self-interest involved. It's like, hey, I'm going to do something for somebody else because it's the right thing to do, but it's also good for me, in the sense of that I believe that if you do good things will happen. I'm just that way, right? I don't believe in karma or anything like that. I just, think positive stuff generates other positive things, and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, I just like to be nice. So it's those type of things. You're benefiting from helping out other people around you, because if this person next to you fails at what they're doing, it may affect you in some way. And so I think communities in a different time period were kind of generally thinking along those lines, but they may not have even been consciously thinking of it. They just kind of all lived together and worked it out. There wasn't really much analyzing going on. Like we kind of suffer from analyzing, right? Myself included. But it's the nature of the beast. We're born into this current modern world, and we're forced to analyze the stuff. Whereas the rugged individual of the past, they just, they didn't have to worry about that type of stuff. And they weren't even brought into the post 20th century mindset.
Well, it's like forcing yourself to articulate the differences between male and female.
Yeah, right, exactly.
In the postmodern world, when that basic reality is just being denied by postmodernism, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You got to get down into the basics of stuff that is just is just quite obvious, and the person of a previous century would just kind of. I mean, I don't even know if they'd laugh. They'd probably shoot you.
Yeah, because what are you, deviant?
For suggesting. It would probably just be second nature to blow your head off, just because it would just be like...
They'd immediately recognize the threat.
yeah, exactly.
Some
of that newfangled city stuff. Yeah.
Damn pervert.
That's right. That's not... Don't even make it to the next word. You're dead. But yeah, so when you get into the advent of schools, first of all, you have this kind of, and like I said, I don't fully agree with this particular author and his conclusions, but he does make a lot of good points that they redefine. First of all, they defined individualism. That's one thing I'll add. I think in order to redefine something, you have to identify it first. So you get into school, you get, the kind of this idea of individualism, whatever, and then they kind of redefine it to mean that, to become an organization man, to become organized. And that's another thing. You you break up and disorganize, agricultural communities and towns through industrialization, and then you reorganize them through education and industrialization. Mm-hmm. And then now you have children who are going to school, and they're being reorganized into thinking that things like teamwork and what's good for the the general, what am I trying to say here? If something is good for you, it has to be good for the group as well. Or if whatever is good for you is also good for the group. Group think, that's the word I'm thinking of. All this type of stuff enters into the school and the education, and it becomes part of the thought pattern. And this was actually all done by corporation and industry, was to retool and to reconfigure the way that people thought.
Yeah.
To identify themselves with industry and work and jobs, and that's how you identified yourself as a person as well.
Yeah, look at the current college university system. How that's
absolutely.
That's your identity, success, and people now. Even parents who realize that what a poisonous atmosphere these universities are, they still feel compelled to send their young kids who've never lived outside the home to these places, and they're shocked when they come home from the first semester that the kid is completely unrecognizable or completely different attitude. But nevertheless, it's they're told they must do this because that's the only way this child is going to be able to either stay within the middle class or get a decent job, and then but they have to support that particular system as if that's the only way you can get an education. But it's not about getting an education; it's about getting a certificate so you can find employment in the corporate state, decent employment.
Yeah, one of the accepted. This is an interesting thing. Is Chris and I kind of talked about before, was that the progressive movement was instrumental in getting the education system started. And it turns out the progressive movement was also run by the Freemasons, and that's something that they'll openly admit in their publications.
Right, that's that magazine in California, right? Freemason magazine or something, where they brag about it.
Yeah, they openly brag about it. They say, in fact, that the one thing you can actually talk about in Masonic lodges is education.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because you're not supposed to talk politics at the lodge, apparently. Right? You don't bring politics into the lodge, but apparently you can talk about education because they're so proud of all the work that they've done with all the schools. And like I said, in this magazine article from the California Freemasons, it's called Freemasons and the Progressive Movement, and it's saying they were instrumental in getting it implemented. And interestingly enough, the progressive movement with the school system in the early part of the 1900s, you see, we associate progressive with the idea of like a liberal nowadays, right? So you're thinking of progressive, and you're thinking, Democracy Now! Or some nonsense like that, some Ford Foundation nonsense. But progressives used to correspond with progress, as in evolution, as in industrialization, as in education, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what progressive was back then, which was all part of, I guess all the stuff the Freemasons were into.
Mm-hmm.
But here's some of the things. Individualism was defined. The definition of individualism fitted the general expectation of human activity in the corporate world. The acceptance of large organization and cooperation as an ideal required a definition of individualism that combined specialization with unity to common purposes. Individual identity was now to be a product of an occupation directed towards some common social goal. This definition of individuality was not just a product of it's talking about a guy who was promoting this stuff, Crowley's abstract thinking. it accurately described what was happening in the cities and factories. Both were becoming dependent on a style of living that required cooperation and specialization.
Now that's Herbert Crowley, not Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, Herbert Crowley, yes.
Okay.
Nor was Crowley's statements on individualism unique. Similar ones were implied in the most statements dealing with the organizational revolution. They also became a part of the working vocabulary of the schoolman. The phrase, meeting the needs of individuals, meant in education the development of a special talent and of the student so that he could fit into a specialized niche in society. Fitting in also required training in the ability to work with others. The progressive concept of a corporate society was held by an extremely influential social group. One could agree. Well, I just lost my place. But anyways, it goes on and just basically says, darn it, I lost my place, but that last part on there was going to get into it. It said that people were resistant to specialization and organization, and that it actually took a redefining of the word individual and individualism in school teaching to make people accept specialization and organization, because it goes on to talk about how like people were really resistant to that because people actually thought of them as quote unquote all around men.
Yeah. They don't the monotony or drudgery of the assembly line. These things,
Yeah, and that's the thing is people think you don't think about that is we kind of associate that without even thinking much about it. You always think about it like, oh, well, this plays into the idea of something like Rick Warren's book. It's called The Purpose-Driven Life. You have this like purpose, right? You have this purpose, and it's a special, unique purpose. And that special, unique purpose most likely will play itself out in the world of getting a job. Right. And in the early part of the 20th century, where people didn't really think along those lines, they, allowed themselves to be redefined through the education. So your special purpose was, like you're saying, working in an assembly line. Finding out what that ability is. Well, it took the educational process to point that out to people. Hey, you know what you're really good at? You're really good at turning bolts.
Yeah, and Chris, now we're with the electronic testing service, the stuff that's developed by Harvard in conjunction with the CIA. What's the Goals 2000? What's the other education program they have now?
Oh, it's darn it.
What's the term?
Oh man,
it's very late here. I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. It starts with an S.
Working with the high tech industry, the Microsoft and Apple and these things, it's an excuse to.
Yeah, it's dude, what is it? It's gonna bug me now. Yeah, it's like. It's on the. Oh man, I can't think of it. It's like it's something funny too. It's like scab. It's not scab though. I'm kidding. It might as well be scab.
It's not. It's not outcomes based education. It's
No, it's science, technology. Yeah, it's like. Oh man, it's like STEP or something like that. It's got an acronym.
Mm-hmm.
STEM. That's what it is. STEM. Science, technology, science, technology, something in math. I can't remember.
But they've gotten away from like liberal arts and.
Yeah, it's anything that is you used to. Well, I was recently listening to a podcast. I've known about this for a long time. I listened to John Taylor Gatto years and years and years ago, and he talked about this all time. But I was recently listening to a podcast where somebody was reaffirming this, where it's like sometimes you used to go to school and you didn't necessarily go to get a major in something because that applied to your job. So it's like you could go to school and get a degree in philosophy and still go work at your other job where you didn't need a degree in anything to work at that job. So it's like you could be an apprentice to somebody to learn how to, be an engineer. You didn't even necessarily have to go to school to learn engineering.
Yeah, and the idea was the education was separate than your job. I mean, there's a base. This to this day now that you have going to college, and the question will be, will you get a job with that degree?
Yeah, I was just going to say my grandmother, both my grandparents went to UCLA. Before Bill Bright was there with the Campus Crusades. But both my grandparents went to UCLA. My grandmother just went to college to go to college because that's like what you did.
And that's when you learned like rhetoric and
yeah. That's why she went. Now my grandfather went to college, but then he also went and got, by that time, but around that time period, they had started developing schools for engineering and
these are technical schools, vocational training,
tech school. Yeah. So these things were being developed to where, okay, now we're going to have this education for the workplace type stuff. But yeah, my grandmother went to school, and I honestly don't know what she got a degree in or anything, or what she. Master's or something. She had a master's in something, but she was a housewife.
Yeah.
She didn't go on to have any sort of occupation where it was directly linked to whatever it was she studied at UCLA. And there were men and women like that. It wasn't like, oh, she was the, atomic 50s housewife or anything. It was just there were men who did that too, because like you're saying, you go there, you learn liberal arts or whatever. Maybe you're an English major, and then you go and have 3 children and you're a housewife.
Yeah.
And so a lot of Hollywood has succeeded over the years at because one thing Hollywood loves to do is they hate mothers. Right? So the hatred of women and mothers in Hollywood is just phenomenal because go ahead.
So I was thinking it was Common Core. So I was
Oh, Common Core. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. But go ahead.
If I'd known we were talking about that, I would have got that right off the bat. I thought you were talking about the STEM thing that they've now promoted, where it's like you're gonna learn how to be like an astronaut in like kindergarten or something.
Yeah, they can identify you.
Yeah.
So
it's like soon you're gonna be walking on the moon, Timmy.
But it's with Hollywood. Anything that's
Yeah, so back to the mothers. Yeah, the mothers. Yeah, so they'll always have these films, and it's just, I can't even think of one in particular, but I'm sure I could make up a quote and you would know exactly what I mean. It's this woman who never got to do anything with her life because she had her, English degree or whatever it was, and she was going to be the next Virginia Woolf, but she had these darn children. She wasn't able to, to live out her goal, and she had this man who was, he was the one getting to go hold down the job, and she didn't get to do anything, right? Granted, that man probably had a heart attack at like 45 years old.
Yeah, he was worked to death, but he was fulfilled. He had the career. It's the career.
So he had the career, and so Hollywood does this on purpose. Obviously CIA and feminism did that on purpose. It's like there was a they're giving you these contrived examples of things like that. If the other thing is one of my grandmothers, I never heard her complain about getting to stay home and watch the children, but see, she probably didn't complain about that because she just kept it inside.
Yes,
probably just really unhappy.
Yes. And no one would listen to her anyway because it's just men were such insensitive pigs. And,
yes.
Yeah. And we all know women are such much happier working and developing anxiety disorders and addictions and these things, slaving for some corporation and where they can feel fulfilled.
Absolutely. And, my experience with women in the workplace is that they're always really cold. So, and I don't mean cold in the sense of that they're not nice. I mean, they're like really cold. Like you can't have air conditioning on in the workplace.
That's right. Can you turn it up? I'm cold.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you need to be home, with children who are fulfilling you and that type of stuff. And you'll be warm, not in this freezing cold cubicle working for a corporation where you're a number.
Well, no, because they have to have income parity because that's the sole measurement of success in life, you see. So if they're not making 100% of what men are making, then they're being oppressed. And that's the only index we have for progress or success or happiness is that dollarized income. You see, they have to be making, There's nothing else you can do in your life except make money.
I heard I remember hearing early on, Ivanka Trump making some statement that we need more childcare in the country.
Now, does she mean motherhood? No.
No, we should. Yeah, how come we're not going to pay mothers to stay at home? Right? Wouldn't that be the most or at least if someone wants to pay, if the government wants to pay me and my wife to stay home with the kids, I'm all for that. Bring it on.
No, the daycare centers, you see.
Yeah. So everybody, the government's for, someone else watching your kids, but they're not going to pay me and my wife both monthly incomes to stay at home and watch our own children.
Yeah, but see, the strangers watching kids are licensed, whereas parents aren't licensed. So
that's true. That's true. Oh man, wow. We live in a strange world.
Yeah.
We live in a bizarre world. Before we deviate too far off the subject, and then we could probably call it a night here. I know it's real late over where you are. I just wanted to bring up this last gentleman here. I was referring to him earlier. His name is Chuck Missler. And it says Chuck Missler is an author, evangelical Christian Bible teacher, engineer, and former businessman. He is the founder of the Koinonia House Ministry based in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Missler graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1956 before working several years in the aerospace and computer industries. He joined the Ford Motor Company in 1963. Missler joined Western Digital as chairman and chief executive in 1977 and became the largest shareholder of Western Digital. In a 1984 interview, Western Digital's then chairman Roger Johnson described the company under Missler as having a good reputation for technology, with a terrible reputation for execution and seriously undercapitalized. In 1983, Missler became the chairman and chief executive of Helionetics Incorporated. He left Helionetics in 1984 to pursue other opportunities in high technology field. It says here he's involved with a lawsuit. In 1989, he headed up the Phoenix Group International, a former Colorado real estate company that entered into high-tech industry to sell personal computers to Russian schools. Okay. And there's something missing in here, because I've actually read a book by him where he says he worked for the Pentagon developing missiles. So that's something he claimed in one of his books. It says, after teaching for many years at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa with Chuck Smith, Missler moved to Coeur d'Alene in 1992 and founded Koinonia House. And then it goes through, just like other people, he co-authored a book with Hal Lindsey.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And he co-authored a book with Hal Lindsey, and
so he's making missiles, and Hal Lindsey's writing books about.
Yeah, because these guys, this guy's big deal is he wrote a book called The Magog Factor, and it gets into the whole Gog Magog, which that thing is all over dispensationalism as well. Is Gog and Magog. That's all over late great planet Earth and all that type of stuff. And so he wrote this book called The Magog Factor, and he was sued by a professor at Miami University who wrote a book called Foes from the Northern Frontier. And they actually had to acknowledge the plagiarism. And yeah, Missler has also been accused of plagiarism of New Age writer Michael Talbot in his 1992 book, The Holographic Universe. Missler has also acknowledged this plagiarism.
He keeps writing books, though?
Yeah, combining his experience with technology and his fascination with Bible prophecy, Missler was also outspoken in predicting that the Y2K would be the key of the beginning of the apocalypse.
Oh, there you go.
In 1998, he co-authored a book with John Ankenberg investigating whether America would survive the crisis to be caused, he claimed, by embedded computer chips that would malfunction when they would calculate as year zero.
Yeah, that was big back around 1997, 98.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of contracts, a lot of corporate contracts, a lot of government contracts dealing with Y2K conversion compliance.
Yeah. So yeah, he's definitely, yes. You know, his Wikipedia has been altered. I'm just noticing that there's something missing from his Wikipedia that was in there before. Pretty interesting.
So, what does this all mean here? What church, mega churches, social alchemy?
Well,
CIA,
yeah, it's what
intelligence, CIA, this stuff, spooks, and
what it boils down to is apocalyptic end time world religion. It is wallpaper for a lot of people. It's cultural wallpaper, as I like to call it. People are getting spooked. If you just look in the, I think my main message, and I think my good buddy Chris and even my buddy Tim here would agree. There's not much we need to be scared about. It's time to stop getting scared about everything.
Yeah, like terrorism or nuclear holocaust and stuff. Yeah.
Do we need to get worried about the big, chubby-faced Kim Jong-un? He's got his he's got his 1970s James Bond movie set over there that they call some sort of room with the nukes in it and the whole bit. Which is funny, every time I see like a picture of him in some sort of, and Jay Dyer's pointed this out before, it's like a movie. It literally is like a joke movie set from like The Spy Who Loved Me or something. It's all those like ridiculous things you've seen in movies all those years that you actually associate with bad guys.
He even wears like the Dr. Evil type outfit,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's wearing he's wearing those kind of I don't know, like Hillary Clinton kind of wears like weird suits like that too.
Yeah.
And it's like dude, what, I can't remember the bad guy from The Spy Who Loved Me, but whoever the guy, you remember he's building the Atlantis out in the middle of the ocean.
Oh, he wears like this, he's a German or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's wearing like this funky suit. Like they've all got these funky suits. Like these people like to wear these weird it's like a mix of like Nazi and communist type stuff or something.
It's like something you get out of like a technocracy type outfit they were back.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, you have all this kind of archetypal type stuff that's been brought in through the movies, and then you see that imagery. When you see the guy, they'll show you something of somebody in North Korea saying something, and the guy is literally probably saying like, "I'm really tired of eating sardines for dinner every night." And they said, "Look, he just threatened the United States."
Yeah, I just read it was a headline the other day that how in 2017 he had outmaneuvered Trump, and I'm supposed to worry about this or something. How he's outsmarting Trump or something. What I don't know. Is he really going to attack the United States? Is this really going to?
No.
He's not. He's not even going to attack Japan, for Pete's sake.
Yeah. He's not even going to attack South Korea, and it's right across the street. It's right across the street from him. But yeah, so I think a lot of this type of stuff, it gets hyped up through religion. You can look back into these previous time periods, and you take a look back, and I've got empirical evidence because I had two parents who lived through this stuff, and unfortunately their lives were affected, quite drastically by literally thinking that, one, apocalypse was going to happen, or two, that the rapture was going to come and whisk us all away and that type of stuff. There was also a lot of movies made back then. Whether it was, kind of the nuke movies or whatever, like The Day After, but there was Christian movies that used to scare the crap out of me when I was a kid. There's one called A Thief in the Night where, it was all about how these, how the rapture happens, and like people's cars are like, stalled on the freeway, and people just disappear in their houses. Mm-hmm. And then after this happens, like the UN starts beheading people with guillotines because they're Christians. You can find this movie. I'll find it on YouTube for free. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I think all this is designed to kind of obviously you're going to devote this much time and energy into these phantoms, right? So you're not going to really have time to figure out what's really going on or develop a worthwhile critical thought about what's going on around you, and they can carry on with their plunder and corruption and high crimes.
Absolutely, and I think just the last thing to say about it is like you can't sit around kind of. A lot of stuff is kind of based off of, you know, we all want to know what the future is. We all want to like sit around and like predict, like, you know, oh, well, if you see this trend and this means this, or, you know, if someone's trying to do it, whether it's financially or whether you want to be safe because you want to go, you know, make sure you've got, you know, a seed bunker, you know, or something like that, which I'm all for being prepared. But a lot of this stuff out there is based off of fear of something that you can't possibly know. It's just not possible. And whether you believe in it or not, whether you believe that, you know, Jesus is going to come back and take everybody to heaven, that's not the point. I'm not belittling anybody's belief in that. I'm just saying you can't possibly know if that's even coming. And certainly Hal Lindsey has bad track record when it comes to predicting that because he's been doing it since 1971 and he's still literally on YouTube doing it in 2017. So, you know, this type of stuff is ridiculous.
But it serves the same function as like nuclear terror, you know,
absolutely
the Cold War and these things. It wasn't so much the psyop wasn't the weapons themselves. It's actually just the awareness of them, or just the fear of them that you know, like this, you know, like I said, that you duck and cover these things. They serve no practical purpose. It's just to scare the hell out of you.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, that's a great point. Yeah, and a lot of this stuff is, you know, and a lot of these things serve different purposes for different time periods, and after those time periods are over with, they can, you know, they just kind of whatever. It's like the moon landing. The moon landing was fake. We all know it was a load of horse pucky. But it served its purpose for the time. You see, I mean, we can all talk about. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to go back and analyze and look at that type of stuff and go like, oh, look at how ridiculous it is with the duct tape and the tinfoil and, you know, and all that type of stuff. And it's funny, and it's good to point out to people that that type of stuff is fake. But it's once it happened, it served its purpose, and it moves, and you know, things move forward. And so it's like with apocalypses and end of the worlds and raptures and that type of stuff, it's like not too many people are going to look back on something and say like, Hal Lindsey, you're either nuts or you're an opportunist or you're working for some sort of intelligence agency. You know, they're going to believe what he's saying. And one of the things people are really good at is pointing to things happening currently, which lends credibility to the idea. Because you can always point at, I mean, obviously, Tim, I'm going to guess, I'm just going to take a wild guess that in 2017, not every single thing in your life went exactly the way you wanted it to. Am I right?
No, I'm very disappointed because I'm waiting for that type of year.
Right. So what I would do as an opportunist is I would point out all the bad stuff that happened to you. And then say, look at how bad it is. This obviously means the apocalypse is coming.
Yeah.
Right. So
all the signs are there.
All the signs are there. Yeah. You got a flat tire. Your kids were misbehaving. You see, end of the world.
Yep.
So
in the meantime, I have my long-term real estate investments.
That's right. But you also have an underground seed bunker just in case.
Yes. Yeah. Survival pack, and I've practiced. I got Joel Scalson's book about.
There you go.
Was it strategic retreat or something? Was it?
What is that? Strategic. It'll come to me in a second. I've heard how many times in my life have I heard that commercial?
You got to buy a house that's at least 10 miles away from any interstate.
Yeah, you got to build like an underground condominium it's like underground condos. There's all this. You got to basically live in like Yeah, you basically got to live in like Round Rock.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things. It's like you got to live in Round Rock, Texas, which seems to be a hub for alternative media. Interestingly enough, strategic. Oh man, that's another one I can't think of at the moment. But
relocation.
Strategic relocation. That's what it is. Yeah.
And this is I think back in like 2008. So next year, in the coming year.
Interestingly enough, if I'm remembering correctly, I think his uncle had something to do with Council for National Policy, I thought.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't surprise me because he did that book, right? Was it The Naked Capitalist or something, or
The Naked Communist and The Naked Capitalist?
Yeah. Which again, a couple of these books it's kind of like a lot of half and quarter truths in those books.
Absolutely.
Just like you sent me that book, Communism, Hypnotism, and the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
I read the intro, like the first 15 pages, I had it on PDF. And some of the analysis is actually sound about music, the importance of music, and you're just blaming it on communists.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
I said that it's almost like the character Jack D. Ripper in Doctor Strange is blaming fluoridation on communism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it is a diabolical plot, but it wasn't the communists doing it.
No, and certainly,
yeah,
and certainly it wasn't the communists just allowing the Beatles to infiltrate American culture either. So
no, and Beatles and pop music in general, and obviously the effect of music on kids and these things, entertainment in general. Just look around you. You know what a weapon that entertainment is, popular culture is. If you don't think it's a weapon, then really you get your head in the sand.
Yeah, and to close this up on a funny note, I've myself personally have actually performed 3 Beatles songs at an evangelical church.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger.
Yeah. That's funny. Was that Let It Be or something?
No, but one of them was My Sweet Lord, which was actively sung in churches even at the time when it came out by George Harrison.
Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Evangelicals adopted it and left out the Hare Krishna part. They would just sing the Hallelujah part.
That's funny, which actually isn't like a Ronette song or something.
It's a Chiffons song.
Yeah, He's So Fine.
Chiffons.
Right?
He's So Fine,
He's
yes.
So Fine.
Yeah.
The tune, rather.
I think George Harrison got sued for that.
Yeah. It was too similar to He's So Fine, yeah.
Yeah, too similar is being nice. It's the same song. It's so funny. Yeah.
It's funny. So, okay, well, John, I want to thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And if you don't mind me just plugging real quick, if you want to check out anything that I do or my good buddy Chris Kendall does, go to hoaxbusterscall.com. You can see all the stuff we post on the blog, all the audios. You can donate. That would always be nice. Mm-hmm. You could also donate to Tim Kelly here for his Our Interesting Times podcast, which I listen to on a regular basis. So,
no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
So, well, John, it is very late here. I am going to hit the sack, let you go. I'm going to post. I'll probably post this sometime tomorrow, and of course, I'll send you the link.
Cool, great.
So go from there. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, sir. And I didn't get to wish you Merry Christmas before. So
Merry Christmas. Yeah, we're still within 12 days. And also, good luck with your strategic relocation. I won't say where.
It's going to be somewhere deep inside the center of the earth.
Let's just say you're moving a little closer to Alex Jones. So that's going to get a lot of conspiracy. One day I'll
make it there all the way down to Austin, Texas. But yes, I'm just going to move to the center of the earth with George Norrie for a little bit first. All right. It's getting late, and we're getting delirious.
I know. Okay. Okay. Good night, John. Take it easy.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.